The chipped ceramic mug warmed my hands, the lukewarm coffee doing little to soothe the icy knot in my stomach. Rain lashed against the window of my tiny apartment, a studio I could barely afford, mirroring the storm raging inside me. Outside, the city glittered, oblivious to the quiet ruin it held. My ruin. It all started with Veronica. Veronica Sterling, to be precise. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Just hearing it was enough to replay the highlight reel of my life crumbling into dust. A life that was once good. More than good, actually. I had a promising career, a loving fiancé, a comfortable life. Until Veronica arrived. We worked at the same advertising agency, Sterling and Klein. I was a senior copywriter, finally feeling like I was hitting my stride. David, my fiancé, was a partner at a law firm. We were planning our wedding, had just put a down payment on a charming Victorian house in the suburbs. Then Veronica sashayed in, fresh out of business school, all blonde ambition and calculated charm. She was hired as a junior account executive, a role beneath my notice, or so I thought. From day one, she made it her mission to befriend me. Lunches, coffees, after-work drinks. At first, I was flattered. Veronica was undeniably charismatic, with a disarming smile and an uncanny ability to make you feel like the most important person in the room. She seemed genuinely interested in my work, my relationship, my life. I opened up to her, shared my dreams, my insecurities, even my wedding plans. That was my first mistake. It started subtly, a stolen idea during a brainstorming session, presented as her own, a client compliment subtly redirected, a late night at the office where she just happened to be there when David called, and she filled him in on a fictional crisis I was supposedly dealing with. Then came the whispers. Rumors about my performance, my work ethic, my stability. They were insidious, subtle enough to be deniable, but they chipped away at my reputation, undermining my confidence. I felt like I was constantly on edge, second-guessing myself, struggling to keep my head above water. "Michelle, are you all right?" David asked one evening, concern etched on his face. "You seem different, stressed." "It's just work," I said, dismissing his worries. I didn't want to burden him, didn't want to admit that my carefully constructed world was starting to unravel, but the strain was beginning to show. Veronica, of course, was there to offer a sympathetic ear. "You know, Michelle, you're working so hard," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you need a break, a vacation. David deserves your attention too, you know. Planning a wedding can be so stressful." She was right, of course, but her words felt like poison slowly seeping into my veins. The final blow came swiftly and brutally. A major account, one I had been working on for months, was suddenly reassigned to Veronica. No explanation, no apology, just a curt email from my boss. "Michelle, I need to see you in my office," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "Close the door behind you." He informed me that my performance had been lacking, that the agency needed to restructure, that my position was being eliminated. I was stunned, devastated. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but it was no use. The decision had been made. I was out. "I'm so sorry, Michelle," Veronica said later that day, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "I had no idea this was going to happen." I saw the truth in her eyes, the triumph, the cold, calculated satisfaction. That night, David came home late, his face drawn. He sat me down on the sofa, took my hands in his. "Michelle," he began, his voice hesitant, I need to talk to you." He told me he had been seeing someone else, that he had fallen in love with Veronica. It didn't happen overnight, of course. David was loyal, or at least he believed he was, but Veronica was a master of erosion, not demolition. She wore down his resolve the way water wears down stone, imperceptibly, persistently. She played the long game. It started with casual proximity. Veronica volunteered to help with a legal contract for a client we shared at work. "Just a few quick questions for David," she'd say, always phrased like an afterthought. But she made sure to dress just right for those meetings. Understated elegance, tasteful perfume, always flattering David's opinions, laughing just a second too long at his jokes. "I'm just trying to learn from the best," she'd say with that bright, eager smile. Michelle always says you're brilliant. Flattery from a stranger always tastes sweeter than devotion from someone you love. Then came the late-night texts, urgent follow-ups, always sent just after I'd fallen asleep beside him. She'd thank him for being so generous with his time, add a winking emoji, sometimes attach a voice note, sultry, low-toned, just to explain better. I saw one once. I didn't say anything. I should have. But the real trap was emotional. Veronica had a way of making people feel needed, especially men who didn't even realize they wanted to be needed. She told David things I never had to tell him, that he was special, irreplaceable, brilliant, that I was lucky to have him, not the other way around, that I didn't see him the way she did. And the genius of it all? She never made a move too bold. She let him make the first real mistake. He told me later, when it was all too late, that the moment he realized he was in love with her came on a rainy Wednesday when I had called him distractedly about a leaking pipe while Veronica had shown up at his office just to bring coffee and check in. She stayed for 2 hours. He never offered her a seat, but she made herself at home anyway. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said. But that was a lie. They both meant it. She just gave him permission to want more than the life we were building, and that was her true power, not seduction, permission. She never took what was mine. She simply convinced him he was never mine to begin with. I stared at him, numb. It was too much, too cruel. My job, my reputation, my fiancé, all gone, stolen by Veronica. He moved out the next day. The house, the wedding, the future we had planned vanished. I spiraled, depression, anxiety, sleepless nights filled with bitter resentment. I lost weight, neglected myself, became a shadow of my former self. My friends tried to help, but I pushed them away. I was consumed by anger, by a burning desire for revenge. I had 2 choices, crumble and disappear, or fight back. I chose to fight. And that's when the plan began to form. A slow, meticulous, insidious plan. A plan that required patience, cunning, and a complete transformation. A plan that started with becoming Veronica's best friend. It took time, months of observation, of gathering information. I learned everything I could about Veronica, her friends, her family, her habits, her insecurities. I studied her mannerisms, her speech patterns, her style. I knew I had to become someone she would trust, someone she would confide in. I started by showing up at the same places she frequented, the same coffee shops, the same restaurants, the same bars. I made sure our paths crossed, always by chance. "Veronica," I'd exclaim, feigning surprise, "fancy seeing you here." At first, she was wary, suspicious, but I was persistent, always friendly, always complimentary. I never mentioned the past, never alluded to the betrayal. I acted as if everything was perfectly normal. "Michelle," she said one evening, after several chance encounters, "this is getting a little weird." "Weird?" I asked, my voice laced with innocence. "I just thought it would be nice to be friends. We used to be so close, remember?" I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wanted to believe me. She wanted to think that I had moved on, that I posed no threat. "All right," she said, finally. "Friends." It was a start. I immersed myself in her world. I went to her parties, met her friends, listened to her gossip. I learned her secrets. And slowly, meticulously, I began to weave my web. "You know, Veronica," I said one night, as we were sipping cocktails at a trendy bar, "I've always admired your confidence. You just go after what you want." She smiled, preening slightly. "Well, you have to, don't you? In this world, you can't afford to be timid." "I guess you're right," I said, pretending to be impressed. "But it must be exhausting, always having to be so assertive." "It is," she admitted, her voice softening. "Sometimes I wish I could just relax, be myself." "You could," I said, my voice low and seductive. "With the right person." I watched her carefully, gauging her reaction. She looked intrigued, vulnerable. I knew I was getting closer. I became her confidant, the person she turned to when she was stressed or upset. I listened patiently to her complaints about work, about David, about her friends. I offered advice, always subtly steering her in the direction I wanted her to go. "David's been working late a lot lately," she said one afternoon, her voice laced with suspicion. "I think you might be seeing someone else." "Oh, Veronica," I said, feigning sympathy. "That's terrible. But you know David, he's always been a bit restless." "Maybe I should just leave him," she said, her voice trembling. "Find someone who appreciates me." "Maybe you should," I said, my voice firm. "You deserve better." I knew I was planting seeds of doubt, undermining her relationship with David. It was all part of the plan. I also started to subtly sabotage her career. I leaked confidential information to her competitors, spread rumors about her unprofessional behavior, and undermined her authority with her clients. "Veronica, I heard you made a mistake with the Peterson account," I said one day, pretending to be concerned. "I just wanted to let you know that people are talking." She paled. "What kind of mistake?" "I don't know exactly," I said, shrugging, "but you should probably be careful." I watched as her confidence crumbled, as her carefully constructed facade began to crack. It was slow, methodical, but it was working. My revenge was taking shape. One evening, Veronica invited me to her house for dinner. David was out of town on a business trip. "I'm so glad you could come," she said, as she poured me a glass of wine. "I really needed someone to talk to." "Of course," I said, my voice soft. "I'm always here for you." We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Veronica was unusually open, vulnerable. She told me about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. "You know, Michelle," she said, her voice slurred, "I've never really had a true friend, someone I could really trust." "Well, now you do," I said, my voice sincere. "You can trust me with anything." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know how much that means to me." As the evening wore on, Veronica became increasingly drunk. She started to reminisce about the past, about our time at Sterling and Klein. "You know," she said, her voice thick, "I always felt a little guilty about what happened to you. With the job, with David." "Guilty?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Why would you feel guilty?" Because I wanted it all," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I wanted your job, your life, and I took it." I stared at her, my heart pounding. This was it, the confession I had been waiting for. "You took it?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You deliberately ruined my life?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Michelle," she sobbed. "I was young, ambitious. I thought it was the only way to get ahead." "And what about David?" I asked, my voice rising. "Did you deliberately seduce him too?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I wanted to prove that I could have anything I wanted, even your fiancé." I stood there, listening, not moving, not even blinking. I'd imagined this moment countless times, her admission, her ruin, my triumph. I should have felt something like satisfaction, closure, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I leaned down slowly, brushing a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear like a mother might do for a child. "Thank you," I whispered. She looked at me, confused. "For what?" "For giving me exactly what I needed." I smiled, serene, composed. "Now it's your turn to lose everything." Over the following weeks, I executed my plan with the kind of focus only obsession can buy. Anonymous tips to investigative journalists, a carefully compiled dossier sent to her biggest client with proof of misused funds and shady account practices, strategic emails accidentally forwarded to HR, and a flash drive sent to David, full of recordings. Her voice, laughing about how easy it was to seduce him just to prove she could win. It all unfolded like clockwork. She lost her biggest client. Her agency demoted her. David left. Her name became toxic in the industry. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends stopped calling. She was alone. Exactly as I had been. I should have felt victorious. And I did, for a moment. But as I stood in front of my mirror one night, watching the woman I had become, I didn't recognize her. My apartment was nicer, my wardrobe sharper, my calendar full of meetings, strategy sessions, and quiet celebrations of Veronica's downfall. But inside, I was hollow, aching, tired. The anger that once burned hot had calcified into something colder, something heavier. I had spent years shaping myself into the perfect weapon, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being me. It hit me one morning, months later, when I passed by the little cafe where David and I used to plan our future. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. The place looked smaller, duller. And I realized it wasn't because it had changed. The revenge had consumed me. And in destroying Veronica, I had lost pieces of myself, pieces I wasn't sure I could ever get back. So I did something harder than revenge. I let go. I stopped tracking her downfall. I deleted the files. I stepped away from the games. I went to therapy, reconnected with the friends I had pushed away, started creating again, not out of spite, but out of joy. I launched my own agency, Phoenix Creative, with a mission built not on proving anything to anyone, but on doing work I was proud of. And slowly, I began to reclaim my life. I never saw Veronica again, but I heard rumors. A small town, a diner job, a woman keeping her head down. One day, a plain envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Veronica, standing outside a diner, older, worn. On the back, just one word, scrawled in shaky ink. Forgive. I stared at it for a long time. For a brief second, I considered reaching out. But I didn't need to. I didn't need to forgive her to be free. I just needed to forgive myself for letting someone else define my story for so long. So I tore the photograph into pieces and threw it away. Not out of hatred, but because I was done looking back. The future was waiting. And for the first time in years, I was finally ready to live in it.